Hello everyone, I'm Lasse. I work as an investor for Maersk Growth, which is the venture arm of the Maersk Group, which is one of the biggest transportation and logistics companies in the world. So my job is essentially to look at supply chains and find solutions that optimize supply chains and decarbonize supply chains. So I'm very, very excited to be here today with a group of people that are just as excited about decarbonizing supply chains as I am. So give a big round of applause for Therese, Sebastian, and Johannes. Welcome on stage.
Thank you.
I think we should kick off by a short introduction. So, Therese, you want to go first?
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here, Lasse. So my name is Therese Lundquist, and I'm the CEO and founder of Green Little Heart. Green Little Heart is an impact platform for a sustainable ecosystem, and basically what it means is that we accelerate growth for tech innovations, ethical, sustainable initiatives, vendors, brands, basically. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Good.
Super. Well, pleasure being here. My name is Johannes. Mella. I'm the CEO of Ignite Procurement. So Ignite Procurement is a procurement and supply chain tool that allows you to get insights into your supply chain, both in terms of cost, environmental footprint, and social risk. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
Sebastian.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sebastian. I'm co-founder of Extantia Capital. We are a venture capital fund investing into a lot of these topics here. Yeah, so decarbonizing supply chains, predominantly in the hardware side, energy space, but of course, significant enablers, as we call them, software space, are also part of the solution. So, yeah.
Very good.
Looking forward to this discussion here.
Yeah, so am I.
It's a mighty task.
It is. We'll have to cover it in 25 minutes, but let's see how far we go. So I actually want to start off by trying to provide an answer to the question that's the title of this conversation as well. Why does decarbonization of supply chain matters? And that can be done fairly shortly. So if you look at a fairly recent estimation done by the UN Global Compact, approximately 70% of a corporate emissions actually comes from its supply chains, and that's 11 times higher than the Scope 1 emission, which is the direct emissions out of the activities. And if some of you who are not, spending all their time in supply chain or climate tech are sitting there wondering what is the Scope 2 emissions, then that is the indirect emissions that comes from electricity and heat that goes into the production. So 70% of the emission footprint, that's the value chain, that's the supply chain, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I would actually like to start out with a fairly broad question. Are we doing enough today to actually decarbonizing supply chains, and what do you see as the biggest challenges in overcoming this?
I'll start. I'll do procurement guy. We'll start. Well, I think the answer is no. Unfortunately, we're not doing enough. I think that's very clear. I think if you look at the targets set out in terms of reducing emissions overall, we're behind. I think I would expect that most people here are aware of it, but obviously that's very bad. We work with a lot of companies and that have started to report on Scope 3 and to some extent also Scope 1 and 2, which is great. And I think in many ways they're probably a little they've probably come further on this agenda than the average companies. But even for those, we see that right now we're spending a lot of time discussing calculation methodologies, which we'll discuss today as well, and various reporting requirements, etc., but actually not enough time making an impact, etc. And I think, what are the reasons for it? I think there are multiple reasons, but somehow I think companies don't really feel the urgency, unfortunately, and that's something we all need to change.
Yeah.
Well, the answer is no, of course. We're not, as you said, near reaching our goals set. And I think one of the big problems is that supply chain, it might sound boring, the supply chain, so we have to make this much more interesting and important, and really make this a gem, because as you say, there's so much of the greenhouse gas emissions and problems, other type of problems as well, as in, ethical questions about who's producing and not. And to really put this in the spotlight will help us move faster, basically. And we have to move together. I think this is also crucial, and with much more speed. So no, it's not enough.
And the third no from my side to make it
that we're all aligned.
Controversial.
Very controversial panel here. No, it is true. I mean, maybe why? I mean, it's just very difficult. Yeah? And you representing here one of the larger polluters, you know it. I mean, you strive for creating better solutions, but it's just very. I mean, the question is always, why are fossil fuels so hard to quit? Yeah. And they are very hard to quit, because in the end of the day, they're actually a very convenient product that has served us very, very well. If we look at it through fossil fuels, we've created the productivity of roughly 500 billion people on the planet. Now finding a way to change that is just not straightforward, and everybody's struggling, and I'm with Therese as well. It's many steps, it's many pieces of a puzzle, and unfortunately we need to solve them all at the same time.
Yeah. It seems like our legislators and regulators are totally aligned with you. They don't think we're doing enough either. So a lot of work is actually right now going into new regulatory frameworks. You can spend a half lifetime reading up on that. But some of the big ones right now is the CSR directive that the EU is working on, and similar work is ongoing in the US with the emissions disclosure rule that SEC is currently working on, which essentially mandates a lot of public companies to start reporting not only on the scope 1 and 2 emissions, but also the scope 3 emissions. And coming from a corporate, I understand that, we can get fairly comfortable around our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. We can also get some insights into our tier 1 suppliers, but as soon as you kind of move out and look further into the supply chain, it tends to be a complete black box. So we have this massive reporting requirement in front of us, but how do we actually ensure that all these small suppliers and also startups are not overburdened by excessive reporting? I think, Johannes, maybe you're working with some of these suppliers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, first of all, I'd say that should these requirements be voluntarily or not, I don't know. I think that's a big question. But I think what we can see, at least, is that with similar types of requirements for other parts of the supply chain, it's actually working, or at least it's now high on people's agenda. So with that in regard, at least we welcome it, and we're very excited to see what will happen. I think the problem here is that, as we've talked about many times, supply chain is very complex. Supply chain data is very hard to collect. And then on top of that, you have different ways to calculate emissions, which makes it even more complex. And I think our view is that companies should be quicker at starting with something, using the data you have in order to very quickly prioritize where to spend more time, right? And in the GHG protocol as well, they talk a lot about that, using what they call so-called initial estimation methodologies in terms of quickly glancing at your supply chain and where are actually emissions highest, right? And from our perspective, we wish that more companies did that. So in short, typically using kind of a spend method to see, well, actually in these categories of spend, this is where most of my emissions are. And here I should spend a lot of time to drive accuracy to a larger extent. But unfortunately right now, our experience is that companies spend a lot of time on the wrong categories, so to say. So if you're a manufacturing company spending, days on calculating business travel, it's great, and I'm not against accurate business travel numbers. I think that's great, but ultimately, that's probably not where your emissions are highest, right? So basically, prioritizing, using the data you have, and then if you do that, I think that a lot of the suppliers, you simply won't bother.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's controversial or not, but spend time where you can actually make the biggest impact. I think that's the short answer.
Yes, so if what I'm hearing you saying is that, we are beginning to kind of get a better understanding of the emissions, but it still tends to be kind of a theoretical averages, divided out on a category. How do we get to the actual accurate data, right? And how do we, so what's happening in the industry today is that a lot of companies, they are focusing on getting their suppliers to actually report themselves with all the challenges of potential fraud or manual errors that actually goes into that reporting. How do we overcome that?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I'm not sure I'm prepared to answer, but I wanted to make one thing clear. You mentioned the two different regulations, the EU Sustainable Financial Disclosure Regulation and the US one. The EU one is way more complex. It also deals with a lot more topics than just the E of ESG, I would say. Yeah? The S and the G are heavy focuses. And I think it's a good thing. Yeah, I think it's actually the better regulation, if I had to compare the two, at least for now. We haven't seen the details of the US regulation yet. But we mentioned it's very complex, it's very difficult. We're an Article 9 fund, so we have a sort of a fairly high reporting burden. And I think as a corporate, you can probably deal with it. As a startup, it's an overburden. And many of the measures that startups supposed to report under Article 9 are very difficult for them to assess and also useless, frankly, because they're a startup. How big is their footprint? It's by nature small. Yeah. So I think what we need to do, we need to readjust a little bit the regulations and have a chapter for startups where maybe there'll be certain exemptions that they don't have to report under certain thresholds, something like this. That's still missing today. Yeah? And I hope, and I also heard that this is a discussion that's ongoing right now on how to actually make this bearable. On the other hand, also maybe just a practical example as well, as we are a European fund with the report on the European regulation. However, we invest outside of Europe, and getting an Israeli startup to fill out your ESG questionnaire is very tough, and you have very little handle on it. Yeah, so you also got to see the global perspective. It's not just we need to make it palatable, I would say, for everybody.
I think this is a complex question, but it's sort of the root of the problem. So there are many layers to this. On one hand, we have consumer behavior and what's driving demand. If this, what we're talking about here, can become a really strong competitive advantage for any brand, of course, prioritization will come to that. And I think this is one trick, really, to make this a competitive advantage. So companies who are having it in their DNA to report and do things properly will have a better, success rate. That's one thing. Then when it comes to small companies, it's hard, of course, because they are small and not so many hands, not so many teams, and data is a very big term and can be very messy, very, different. But the regulatory framework that's coming now is good because it helps us to sort of have more one vision or version of the data, which becomes, what we're going to work with. That will help, of course, small companies. The good thing for a startup is that they can start right from the beginning. They don't have to go back and change things. So in that sense, that's really good. And the companies that we represent, they are ethical and sustainable as much as they can be, given which innovations they are working with. So they have a good starting point, but for them it's really hard to prioritize this as well because, it takes a lot of time and it's very, very difficult. So helping them and building the platform approach, enabling from them solutions, this is something good that we can do and provide for them. So it becomes easier and really a competitive advantage. I think this is important. And for bigger organizations, as we spoke about in there, making supply chain and the knowledge of it much more into the full organization, I think is really, really important. So you get the full, momentum of, the change that you can actually do from acting accordingly, basically. I think this is important. Yeah. But it's complex.
It is.
Very.
And it's also very difficult to be at a stage at a tech conference without mentioning AI, machine learning, data analytics.
Of course.
So what role, if any, do you see those types of technologies will actually play in improving the reporting?
This morning I asked chatbot exactly, this I asked, so I got this really good long, report. It was really good actually, the questions. So yes, it plays a big role. I think For smaller companies, if we can have AI to support with reading data, of course, this becomes very, very practical and something good to use. But AI, again, is also a very, very complex thing. And yeah, we're just in the beginning of seeing how much it can actually do for us. But in the same time, it can be very hard.
Perhaps, Johannes, you can elaborate a bit, because I know that's some of the stuff that you're working with as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think if we start off with the reporting side, I mean, we've talked about it already. It's very complex. There's many different factors to take into account. And let's say that we work with a mid-sized manufacturing company, not particularly big, but mid-sized. They typically have at least 2 plants, maybe operations in 2 countries. And then they have a mix of different spend, everything from raw materials purchasing to energy to business travel, etc. Right? And I think, and then on top of that, we have various ways to estimate GHG impact by using a supplier-specific, product-specific, activity-based, spend-based, etc. And I think my point is that with all of this, there's inherent complexity in the underlying data, but also the methodologies in terms of finding the right emission factors, matching in the best possible way, prioritizing the areas where you need more accuracy than others. And I think for a lot of that, actually, AI can help to automate a lot of that process so that you can do that much more seamless in the future, right? And we have a couple of use cases that we already use in that regard. Simple stuff as, okay, so these are all my purchases, right? Then what sort of categories of spend are they? And what does that mean for how I calculate GHG emissions, etc.? So that's the reporting part, and I think that can be helpful not only for small companies, but I think even as much for the big ones, because here it's even more complex, right? And then on top of that, and I won't speak a lot about that, and then Sebastian might chime in on this as well, is obviously all the recommendations in terms of initiatives, etc. you can do, and that's obviously where it becomes very exciting, but I do think you need a good baseline to start with.
Do you have anything to add, Sebastian?
About AI, I can only say this will have a huge impact. Full stop.
Full stop. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Maybe you can provide your view to my next question here. So we talk a lot about data. We talk a lot about collaboration as well. We've seen a lot of companies, startups, kind of going after this carbon accounting space over the last couple of years. And they all talk about collaboration as the key thing that they're doing. But it seems like if a company selects a carbon accounting firm, you have to collaborate with that firm alone. So how do we actually foster collaboration and interoperability between the different platforms? So again, we're not overburdening the suppliers that need to report into 15 different systems in order to actually serve their customers.
Well, I think collaboration is key here. I think no one can do this alone. This is clear. So I think it has to be initiatives and incentives to actually collaborate. That can come from, I don't know, many different things. And I think switching to action and just not reporting is also something which is crucial. I mean, report we have to do, but then we have to do something with the results. We have to actually switch to action mode, and we have to do multiple things at the same time. Otherwise, we will not reach the goals. We will not reach net zero. And I think that requires a lot of strength and a lot of capacity and a lot of understanding also within organizations for moving into that action mood and actually start collaborating. And in that sense, I think perhaps we have to change how we measure, how we, the KPIs we actually use for defining success. Are they really relevant today at this day and age? I mean, they are like a history, from a long time ago, how you actually calculate a company's result. I think we have to redefine this and put this type of initiatives and other factors into KPIs. And when we do that, I think the action will come. And I think this is a trick.
I think it's a great question, but it's also very hard, and I'm not sure if I have the perfect answer. Unfortunately, I wish I had, because if so, we'd probably build a product for that. But just to kind of double down on what you're saying, in Norway we have something called the Transparency Act now, which is enforcing every company of a certain size to assess social risk in the supply chain. something along those lines. And through our platform, we have about 100 customers or so assessing their suppliers. And over the past months, 500,000 suppliers have been assessed somehow through our portal. Unfortunately, they've probably been asked by 3, 4, 5 other companies for exactly the same type of questions. So I think what's clear to me is that it has to change, right? It doesn't work. We're doing a lot of experiments around data sharing, collaboration.
Would you be open to, talking from Ignite, would you be open to share your kind of data protocol with other potential competitors of yours?
Exactly, and I think that's the type of stuff we are talking about. Should some of us, and then I mean Ignite and our competitors, basically create an open database where we can share this sort of information? I know there's, again, I really don't know the answer, but I think it's pretty clear to me that something has to change. We're prioritizing that on our extent to find a good answer to it, but it will be very interesting to see.
Let's switch gears a little bit and taking you up on the whole action agenda here, because now we talked a lot about emissions, but of course that's only the foundation for actually going out and doing action. So, Sebastian, you're investing a lot into companies that are actually mitigating and reducing the emissions.
Yes.
What are the most promising technologies in your view?
My favorite question. Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, what we call these responses, right? So we have to respond to a certain scenario, which at the moment is too much CO2 in the atmosphere, right? So we are basically looking at any technology that can have a significant contribution on the way here. So if you look at the climate stack, where the emissions come from, it happens to be 70% is energy related. Yeah, energy can come in all different shapes and forms. It can be electricity, it can be heat, it can be transport fuels. Yeah, so so it's not just electricity out of the plug. That's actually, to be honest, the easiest part to solve. Yeah? Because wind and solar and some other technologies here are quite efficient. Heat is a much bigger problem and much overlooked problem, not so easy to solve. And then transport fuels are also quite a huge problem, at least for certain sectors, like your own sector, the long-haul shipping sector, or the long-haul flight sector. I mean, in terms of passenger cars driving around short distances, I think we have a pathway clear. Electrification is a go. Yeah. So what we're looking to always is basically a way how can we add electrons to the grid that have, by now it's 3 characteristics, major characteristics. It used to be 2. We used to call about the dilemma. So we had a dilemma where it was affordable and clean. Yeah? Now, thanks to our friends in the East here, it's a trilemma. So it's affordable, clean, and secure. So those are the 3 things that we look for. What are the potential responses that can give that? There's other aspects and there's sub-aspects of it too. For example, carbon management. When we talk about carbon management, we don't talk about carbon accounting. There was a we had that. So it's about managing the actual molecules, of carbon. That's, of course, is another part of the issue. We will need hydrocarbons. Yeah? It could be methanol, could it be any shape and form, but we will need hydrocarbons or e-fuels or.
So are we over-indexing too much on some technologies and putting too much, faith into technologies that are developed? We spoke before, and I know you paid a much higher price for carbon offsetting your flight ticket here than the actual flight ticket. So carbon capture, as a very concrete example, is a very promising but also very immature technology at this point. Are we putting too much faith into these brave new world technologies will actually save us in terms of offsetting? Or
simple reality check on that on front. Yes, it seems expensive today. We are using Climeworks, paying $900 per ton. It's very expensive at the moment. And for sure, it's not sustainable. We're doing it because we want to help the industry scale. Okay, clearly. However, who needs carbon? The carbon is mostly needed by hydrocarbon players, so oil and gas industry today. They want circular carbon in the future in order to have a sustainable long-term business model. And they are the ones investing into carbon, any type of carbon management now, be it the sucking the carbon out there, being it turning into high-value materials later on. Could be hydrocarbon, could be graphite, could be carbon nanotubes, so different pathways. Or sequestration, basically burying under the ground. if you looked at the last years around, the one companies who have made sustainably very large profits, it's the oil and gas industry. And I would not bet against them, to be honest. They will find ways to make this economically very viable. And we see today technologies in the market. Climeworks is the extreme example, highly inefficient. I don't know the exact numbers, but thousands of joules per kilogram. That's how we look at technologies. We see technologies today in the 1 to 3 joules per kilogram space, resulting in capturing costs below $50 when it's very economically viable to do. At that point, it's cheaper to create an e-fuel than actually pumping it from the ground.
So maybe, Therese, you can provide a perspective from...
I think new technologies, of course, is always something we look at a lot. And concretely, I can give you an example how new tech can actually help reducing, our dependency on fossil fuels and carbon as a whole. We have this test that we're starting now. One of our companies, they are the innovator of 3D printing liquids. And we have another brand who actually produce a lot of skincare, very nice skincare. So like the skincare industry use a lot of plastic. I mean, it's so much that it's even hard to pronounce the numbers, the amount of plastic used in the packaging.
And petrochemicals too.
Yes. So what we're going to do now is actually 3D print on demand. And you can just imagine how much, if this works, how much less we need to produce when it comes to packaging and plastic. And of course, that's the new technology. We're testing it and it's fantastic and it can scale definitely. So that's like concrete examples. And that's like the beauty industry. And then we're doing the same for the fashion industry, meaning on-demand production and going away from linear processes that we have had to more circular and less, basically. We need to do less.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time here very quickly, but last question. You obviously know so much about the supply chains and decarbonization, but if you look kind of a decade or 2 decades into the future, what keeps you up at night? What are you really scared that we won't overcome in the time we need it?
I'm really, really scared of climate change, I must say. I mean, all this sad things as a consequence of it affecting large part of the world, and soon it's going to be reality for all of us if we don't act together. And I'm scared that we don't find that in our heart to act together, and we still just continue in our own silos, in our own worlds. And I think that's going to be crucial that we collaborate and hold hands and change, basically.
I'm hopeful that that solutions like Ignite can help companies automate and simplify their reporting so that they can spend time on actually reducing emissions. But I'm scared that we'll be sitting here in a few years' time and still discuss where to spend most time, how do we actually do this, etc. And I think, we just need to see change as soon as possible, and hopefully we, together with others, can help us get there very quickly.
So you sleep like a baby during the night. No. What about you, Sebastian?
What makes me skeptical is the amount of collaboration we need and the willingness to collaborate. When we see from Rio to Kyoto to Paris to Montreal now, we like to come together, discuss, but the actionable outcomes are very little, and too little. Climate crisis is a problem we've been knowing, you could say, at least since Rio '92. It was very obvious. Yeah. And even after Kyoto, everybody knew. Still, we haven't collaborated. So I wouldn't count so much on collaboration until we hit a wall. We hit a wall. A wall, in this case, looks like a heavy GDP drop, 30-40% GDP drop. Then you might see collaboration. As an investor, I couldn't live with that scenario, clearly. That would be horrible. So obviously, I hope that technology will come in and will also significantly advance us. That we don't have to hit a wall, that we maybe get around without collaboration, but actually just having products in the market which are ecologically and economically viable.
Let's make that the final words. Please give them a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Lasse.
Thank you, Lasse.